My name is Gregory Hsu. I am someone who grew up in this church, and I grew up in the kids ministry and the youth ministry and part of the English congregation, and so obviously I have a lot of fondness for being here. And many of you have known me since I was a kid, and now I'm at the age where I've known many of you since you were a kid. So it's always fun to be here, part of this intergenerational family of ministry. But I have the honor of being here today to preach with you all, and if nothing else, it gives some of the pastors a break and lets Eric and Kathy make a longer trip back to visit family in Minnesota. So always happy to help them with that. But you know, you all have been going through the book of Acts for a while. Acts is a long book, and so you know, even when I was here back in November, we were only like 4 chapters ahead of this, right? So in a 7-week span, it seems like we've covered half a chapter per week, right? So there's a lot of text here, and so you might have been in this a long time, and sometimes it's easy to kind of you're in this series, or you kind of lose track of where you are. But you know, I hope today that as we kind of get to the end of things, right? I'm going to do my best to kind of like complete Acts, and it's certainly possible that Eric might come back and have more to say about some of the last section, but want to kind of give us, as we get towards the end of the year, a time of conclusion to this book. And today it's called, I've given the title A Powerful Ending, because it's the end of the book, and yet in a way it's a very strange ending to a book. You can see there that picture, that's not just some random dude, that's a fresco from the 4th century of the Apostle Paul found in a tomb, the catacomb of St. Thecla, who there's a story that Paul and another female kind of evangelist, Thecla, did a lot of preaching and miracles, right? But so there's multiple kind of shrines that kind of are in her honor, and this is the earliest known image of Paul. And some of the writings say like, well, he's sort of bald and he's got a short beard and he looks a little bit grumpy, and I say, it's a pretty accurate depiction. So if you didn't wonder what Paul looks like, the accounts and the images seem to look like this. The other picture I have there is a photo of a very dark, I don't know if you can totally see it, but it is a dark stone room with a hole in the ceiling. And that is the bottommost floor, the dungeon level of what's now called the Mamertine prison, which was the only quote-unquote maximum security prison in Rome for many centuries, and it was where political prisoners were kept until they were executed by the state. And so the tradition holds that Paul, and probably Peter as well, and maybe many others, were held here. And some of these people who were held in that prison were kings of Gothic tribes, right, or foreign emperors, foreign kings that Rome had defeated. But it also was the place where people who were accused of civil unrest, like Paul, were kept. And Paul, in his final days, was in this literal pit, this dungeon. And so you should have asked yourself, like, is this the ending? Is this the ending of Acts? Now, before we get to that, some of you, my kids are not here with me today, but on the left there you see my boys, James and Manny. Yes, those are both boys. They just have long hair. We are expecting a 3rd child very soon, and so I probably won't be with you in a preaching capacity for several months. So I'm glad to be here. And then you can see over on the right a picture of my parents and my wife and I and the boys for Christmas. So hopefully you all got to celebrate, and it's been a good time and a season of joy for you. But maybe it's not. Maybe Christmas or the holidays is a complex time, and I do think that in some way is in my head as I think about this text, because Acts ends very strangely. Now, just to give you a recap of where we've been. When I was here in November, I preached on how Paul was really insistent on going to Jerusalem, even though all his friends, all the Christian leaders, like serious Christian people, other apostles, people who were apostles before Paul, people who have prophetic gifts, all these people said, Paul, you really should not go to Jerusalem. And he insisted, and they insisted, and there's like serious scholarly disagreement about who was right. But what we know is in the end, Paul insisted, and he went to Jerusalem, and just as everyone was concerned, and even he knew, he was wrongfully accused by the Jewish leaders there who were bitter at him for his joining. He was a very prominent Pharisee, right? A very prominent political and technically paramilitary leader, okay? And he had left their cause to join the opposite cause. It's humiliating for the Pharisaical kind of sectarian group, right? And so they are really angry with him. They've been waiting for years for the chance to kill him or imprison him. And so when they go, they see him, he comes back, they kind of launch these charges against him. And as expected, it goes pretty badly. Now, he's almost murdered by a mob of their kind of henchmen, but his sister, apparently he has a sister, his sister's son gets word to a centurion and says, hey, they're gonna kill Paul. Like, they're gonna just take him out of the prison and kill him. Like, if you're the Romans, you probably don't want that to happen. That's mob rule. So they capture Paul, the centurions capture Paul, and they take him to a different city called Caesarea, and they imprison him there to be tried directly by the governor, right? So this is a very high-profile situation. It's very tense, very high-profile case. And then, from chapters 23 to 26, you get this like long, and I mean long, courtroom saga, where Paul is asked to defend himself about these charges that the Jewish leaders are lobbying against him, that he's inciting unrest. And he has a good case because he wasn't actually inciting unrest. It was mostly that he was preaching about Jesus is actually the Messiah and who is the Son of God. And that offended the Jewish leaders because they said, that's heresy, that's not the fulfillment of our prophecy. So they wanted a reason to get him in trouble. And so they bring him before the civil authorities, right? They have a religious matter, but he's dragged before the civil authorities. And the governor, Felix, hears his case. Now what's interesting is that, and you probably covered some of this, but if you don't remember, what Paul has to say about following Jesus and the life of righteousness and forgiveness and humility, his description of the Christian way is disturbing to Felix. It says Felix was distressed when he heard about Paul talking about humility and righteousness. I think it's a really weird detail, right? And Luke, the author, was with Paul through these proceedings. And so you have to imagine if it's like a court or like a Senate hearing, right? He's sitting there with Paul, and you can see Felix up there starting to sweat and get nervous when Paul talks about sacrificing yourself because God is love and forgives all, right? And so the message of the gospel it can be very unnerving to those who have power. But Felix, though he is aware that, really Paul's not done anything wrong, he also cares about his power. He doesn't want to get in trouble with the Jews, so he actually keeps Paul in prison for 2 more years, stalling, continuing the case. I mean, can you imagine being detained unjustly with no real charges against you after having defended yourself for 2 years waiting for something to happen? I mean, it's almost unbearable to think about. Now, eventually, a new governor comes into power, and that's Festus. And now the Jews are looking for another chance to say, okay, we got a new governor in power. We now have a chance to kind of get Paul in trouble again. Let's stir up more controversy to have the case brought up again. And then this time we'll kind of like find a way to push this thing forward. And so Festus, who's new to the situation, kind of gets involved, and Paul, again, I didn't preach this text, but I'm looking back from my understanding of it. Paul decides to invoke something. He has this really famous part where he says, I'm a Roman citizen. I invoke my right to be tried by Caesar. Okay. Now, this would be sort of like if you had like a parking ticket. Again, I'm being facetious. If you get a parking ticket and you go to kind of like civil court, and you say, I don't think that I have a parking ticket. And they say, you have a parking ticket. You say, no, I want to be heard. I want my case to be tried by the President of the United States. Okay, I want to go to the White House to have my ticket, my case understood. Now again, that's facetious because this is a political matter, right? But it would sort of be like, oh, you put up a political sign that you're not allowed to put up, or that kind of like offended somebody, right? Because it's literally an opinion matter, right? You put up a yard sign and you had a protest, you tick someone off, and they say, I don't know, I want to be tried by the President of the United States. None of us have that exact right. Like, we do have a right in the American system of kind of judicial process, but like, I can't just say, I want the president to hear my case. But in a similar way, they have a process where you can actually bark your case up the ladder all the way to like the imperial court, and if your case is serious enough, it'll keep going, right? And so, but this is a very serious thing because, you have to imagine, Caesars are not part of a democratic system. They're rulers through military might. They're not usually interested in kind of pardoning people. They usually pardon gladiators who kill other people really well. They're pro-violence, okay? And so they're not usually going to say, oh, you know what? Your protest sign was totally valid. You have a right to free speech. That's not the case. Rarely would a Caesar ever decide in your favor. So this is a really desperate move. What Paul is doing here is saying, I'm trying to force the ball forward. I don't want to wait for 2 more years. I want this thing to move forward. And so Festus says, okay, hey, if you invoke Caesar, then we have to advance this into Caesar, right? So in a way that actually gets the thing moving a little more forward. But then, Festus is nervous because he says, well, we have to figure out what's going on here. Another nearby ruler, King Agrippa, is there in town as well to visit him. And he said, why don't you join me and we'll hear Paul's case and we'll figure out what are the charges we actually have to pass along, because there's no charges. Paul's been tried multiple times and he has no charges that he's being accused of. I mean, how can we even, it's complete absurdity, right? It's being held without any kind of actual legal charge. So they hear his case. And interestingly, again, as he's talking about Jesus is the Messiah, the anointed one foretold in the Hebrew Scriptures, who has come to bring salvation to all, including to the Gentiles, right? And Festus, the new governor, who also wants to not irritate the Jews, also gets very nervous hearing these words. He says, you should just stop talking. He says, all your great learning has made you insane, is what he says. He's like, you're too smart for your own good. You're making stuff up, right? And Paul says, no, I know what I'm saying. And actually, he pushes harder and says, what I'm saying is clearly confirmed in the Scriptures. And actually, King Agrippa, he looks at the governor, King Agrippa, don't you know what I'm talking about? And Agrippa seems to agree. So there's this very weird moment where Festus is getting nervous about the political implications of the trial, but Agrippa actually is drawn in. You can almost see him leaning in. And clearly Agrippa actually has an understanding, even an openness to this, which is unbelievable, right? It's unbelievable to think about, this serious government official being really open. And he doesn't sort of convert or anything, but he sort of spars with Paul a little bit, and Paul says, well, don't my words have merit? And in the end, Agrippa says to Festus, I heard this case, we were supposed to write this list of charges. Festus, there's nothing to charge this guy with. We should let him go, but we can't. We can't let him go because he appealed his case to Caesar, and now that process of case is going on. We don't have any more power to release him, right? By doing this, he's now protected from the Jewish leaders and also from us, but that means that we cannot stop this thing from going. And so he ends up proceeding, and so they say, all right, off you go to Rome. And so now here we are finally, Acts 27, Paul's ocean misadventures. Eric originally asked me to preach this particular passage, and he said, this passage is such a strange passage. Like, of course, every word is beneficial for the believers, but it reads like an action movie, so what can you really preach about it? It's sort of like, make sure you know how to swim. I don't know, it's crazy. But, so I'm going to cover this because I think it's thrilling and insane, and it prepares you for the final stage, and again, it shows how odd this passage is. So for Acts 27, we now go to Paul's ocean misadventures. We've had 3 chapters, 3 years of courtroom drama. We now come to the kind of disaster movie section. We go from the Pelican Brief to Titanic. Okay, we go from Law and Order, okay, to kind of like a disaster movie. It's a very strange genre move. So here's the journey that Paul takes. So you see on the bottom down there, Caesarea, bottom right above Jerusalem. And he goes all the way to Rome, which is top left. Now today, if you were to want to do that, you would get on a plane, and you'd be there in 3 hours, 55 minutes. It would probably cost you about $200. Now, as you can see, they don't have a plane, and they have to sail. And water, the ocean, the sea, there's a lot of impact with weather, right? I don't know how many of you can sail. I can't sail, right? But sailing is not easy because you have to be able to read the wind and use the wind, and the wind has its own opinion about where it wants to go, right? We don't have jet propulsion, right? You're kind of trying to harness the natural elements to get somewhere. And so what they want to do is they want to sail along the coast. As you can see, they're kind of following the coast, right? That line goes towards this place called Lycia, what's then called Asia, which is sort of Turkey. They're going up the coast, and you see they want to kind of stay around the Greek islands or maybe go up through Athens, this passageway between Athens and Corinth, because they want to be closer to the shore. They don't want to be out in the open ocean. Where it's harder to navigate, they could be hit by storms, right? So they're trying to do that, and then they're going to go all the way from Athens and keep following the coast and maybe land on the east side of Italy and then kind of go across the land. So the whole point is that they're trying to get Paul to Rome, and there's other people too as well. But that's not what happens. So they're trying to go along the coast, and where does this line go? It goes all the way into the middle of the Mediterranean Sea, the literal opposite. Well, why? Well, it's because everything goes really not according to plan. I'm not going to read you the text of the chapter because, one, it's very long and it's hard to follow. And so this chart, with the help of ChatGPT, is a much easier way to understand what happens. And even so, this chart is hard to understand because you say, wait, how many stops are there? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. This is a long, multi-legged journey. When we fly planes, most of you, when you look for flights, you don't want more than one stop. You're like, okay, if I'm going overseas, maybe 2. If you're going to somewhere like Asia or somewhere hard to get to, okay, all right, I'll accept 2 stops, okay, West Coast and then Narita, and then we can go to wherever I'm going, okay. But you're not going to accept a 5-stop plane itinerary, right? You would never do that. Look at this itinerary. Look at this itinerary. This is like a 10-stop thing. And you know you see the little X's. X's are when they tried to go somewhere and they couldn't go there because the weather was so bad. Right? So it's like I don't know if you've ever been in a plane that's had to make an emergency landing. I have not, because it doesn't happen very often. Right? But it's like you're saying, oh, we're trying to land at Logan, but the weather is so bad. So we're going to have to go to Providence or JFK instead. Those are not the same place. Okay? If they redirect you, then you're like, well, I guess you're on foot from here. Like what? You just had like 2 weeks to my journey to get home. But that's what it was like, because the weather was bad. So they're following the coast, and they change ships multiple times because there's no like direct sailing to get to Rome, and they try to get to this place called Cnidus, right? And so if you see up here, go back. Cnidus is right next to Myra. Right? Sort of that the red line does not get to Cnidus because they keep getting blown away. And so in order to get further west, they wanted to go across that kind of dot of islands. They can't get there. They said, well, let's go all the way down to Crete because that big island will block us from the wind. I mean, again, this is just logic you would never think in your own normal life. You would normally never say, I'm going to take Route 90 instead because there's less wind there on my way. This is crazy thinking, right? But that's how it was then. So they try to get to Cnidus, and it doesn't work, and so they have to go all the way south to Crete, and they land at this place in Crete. And so then already it's taken them like many weeks. So they should have, in a way you could say, if all had gone according to plan, they would be almost to Rome by now, but now they're half the Mediterranean away in the wrong direction, and the weather's getting worse. They're in Crete. Crete is not Rome, in case you didn't know, okay? And Paul says, hey, guys, look, I know you've got a duty to follow. I know we're all trying to get to Rome. Actually, Paul himself is eager to get to Rome. He says, look, I want to get to Rome as much as anyone else, but I don't think we should get in the ocean. We should not continue this journey right now. This is not a good time to sail, right? And I think he knows that because he's a sensible person, but he also sort of a spiritual inclination, like this is not wise. He says, if you do this, if you choose to sail, there will be serious harm and loss of cargo and danger to all of us. Please don't do this. But the centurion ignores him, and him and the captain of their next ship say, let's go. Now, I think the captain's motivated by money, because if he gets there sooner, he gets paid sooner, right? He gets to drop off his cargo. And the centurion, I guess, he doesn't want to be stuck in the middle of the ocean. So they get in the boat, and they start to sail. And so they're supposed to go, so Crete's this middle island here. They're supposed to go to the other part of Crete, just another little part on the island, okay? Just like 70, 80 miles away. They're supposed to go on the same island 80 miles away. But what happens? They get blown so far off course that they get blown into the rest of the Mediterranean Ocean for 14 days. Okay, that's like if you were trying to drive from here to Weston, and then because the weather was so bad, you ended up in Hartford, or Philadelphia, or DC. Son, why are you late? Where are you? You know curfews. Well, Mom, I was driving, and now I'm in Atlanta. I'm sorry. I'm going to be late for Christmas. Yeah, you sure are going to be late for Christmas. But it's not only blown off course. It's 14 days where they're not just sailing the wrong direction. They have no control over where they're going. The wind is the only thing pushing them, and it's pushing them away and in the darkness. It says that they cannot see the sky for 14 days. And in the day of naval sailing, you need stars and sun and moon to navigate. So even if you could go, again, they don't have an engine, they can't just kind of redirect, but even if they could redirect, they wouldn't know where to go because they cannot see anything. I mean, you have to imagine, this is dreadful. This is completely terrifying. So finally they're drifting along, and it actually gets a lot worse. I mean, there's like all these, the verses are endless, but Paul's like, we're all gonna die, and what should we do? And some of the crew, they're really ruthless. He said, what if we sneak out and get on a lifeboat and leave everyone else behind, right? And Paul said, hey, he says to the centurion, like, you can't let them do that. We actually need everyone, like, they're the sailors. If they leave, we will all die. So, like, maybe stop them from doing this. And so actually, the centurion has to cut the ropes in the lifeboat so that the lifeboat's gone, so they can't get away. So this is totally crazy. It's like reverse Titanic. You're all staying on the ship, right? And so this thing, they keep going and going, and eventually they crash into a reef. And before they crash into a reef, they're all like sick with dread. I'm sure if you were seasick, you were certainly miserable by now. Paul has this interesting moment where he says, hey, I promise you, he said, first he says, I told you so. I said, we shouldn't have done this. And now here we are, like you think you're all gonna die, and we should. But the truth is, God has protected us. He said, I have a vision where an angel told me that we won't die. I'm gonna make it to Rome to stand trial, which means we're not gonna die. And so if you listen to me, and if you have faith, we'll make it. So he actually has this thing where he like breaks bread and gives it to people, and it sort of reminds us of the feeding of the 5,000, or the Last Supper in a way. And then they crash on the reef, and then again, it doesn't get any easier, because when they're crashing on the reef, they're sinking, right? So yay land! No, not yay land. Like now we're stopped, and we can die another way, right? And so the soldiers who are under the centurion, they are nervous. They said, if we have to take care of these prisoners who are in chains, I don't want to swim dragging this guy behind me. We're on a reef. Like, what they want to do is they said, let's just kill all the prisoners. And then we haven't kind of failed in our duty. Then we can just get away clean. But I think the centurion is sort of moved by like, hey, that's like not very ethical to do. And Paul says, don't let them kill us. I promise you that if you let us try to swim for shore, we will all make it. Okay, now just for some scale, it says, and there were 276 people aboard this ship. It's a whole plane of people. They said, well, if we all jump off, somehow grabbing onto wood and kicking your legs, we'll all make it. That's like a really big claim. But apparently miraculously, they all do. Nobody dies. And so again, the centurion is sort of proved right, and Paul's going to prove right. Look, like I told you so, but we're going to make it. It doesn't get easier. They start to stack wood. It's almost like if you watch the show Lost. They're trying to stack wood to kind of build a fire. And while Paul is picking up firewood, he gets bitten by a venomous snake while he's trying to build a fire. This is crazy. I mean, literally, it's every episode is like a cliffhanger, right? And the locals say, oh my gosh, this guy just survived a shipwreck, and now he's getting bitten by a snake. God must really have it in for him. But miraculously, Paul's not killed. He just kind of shakes it off. He says, okay, let's get back to building the fire. They said, wait, he's not cursed. This guy must be divine. And amazingly, Paul's ended up getting housed by the local official. He does some healings. He heals the official's sick father, which reminds me of kind of him, Jesus healing Peter's mother, and he heals the whole island. People on the island come to be healed. And so the thing is, though, because they got blown off course, and because the weather's been so bad, and because they got lost, and it's the middle of winter, they have to stay on this island of Malta, okay? They got stuck on Malta. They have to be in Malta for 3 months, waiting. Because the weather's so bad, you can't sail out. Like people literally, once you get to a certain point in the calendar, you say, okay, let's try and get to a good port where like the food is good, and we can like live comfortably and cheaply, because we're not going to be able to sail anywhere for 3 more months. That was like standard practice. So they're stuck here in Malta waiting. But weirdly, Paul has a good time there. I mean, he's well regarded by the Maltese, and they like him a lot, and he heals them and he teaches, and so like he has this sort of like temporary seasonal church while he's there. And then eventually they're able to go, and they proceed to Syracuse and Rhegium and Puteoli, and all of this is still another 3 more weeks of traveling. And they finally get to land, and they walk up to Rome, where he kind of sees some Christian people along the way. So in the end, this journey it's 2,200 miles, and it takes 4 to 6 months. Okay, what would take us 4 hours by plane takes 6 months, and they could have died like no less than 3 to 4 times. Okay, so that's chapter 27. Okay, that's all chapter 27 is, this insane action movie, like Titanic. It's just crazy. But then what? What happens? Well, then once they get to Rome, Paul proceeds, and he's allowed to be under what's called house arrest. So in those days, they don't have like a big prison. They actually, you have to pay to rent a building and then like your own space, and then they assign you a guard to follow you around. But Paul is allowed to rent an apartment, rent a house, and have this space of his own. And for 2 years, he waited for his case. Again, 2 more years. Okay, so this is years and years and years, right? He's waiting for his case to be heard by Caesar. But in that time, he's allowed to kind of be in his house and meet with people. It says that he met with local Jewish leaders, and his teaching was provocative. Some of them said, wow, this guy's really talking about the truth of God. This is the real deal. And other people were very offended, just like it's happened every other time. But it says this really, really powerful phrase. It said that, and Paul was able to preach the gospel with boldness and without hindrance. Okay? For 2 years he's there. Paul was allowed and able to preach the gospel with boldness and without hindrance. The end. What? We just spent 35 verses covering this action movie of travel mishaps. And then Acts next chapter ends at verse 18. It says, and he was able to preach the gospel with boldness and without hindrance. End. Nothing else. We don't have any word about who else he talks to, what else happens to him. We don't know if he actually sees Caesar or not. He does. We don't know how the trial goes. It doesn't go well in the end. He's ultimately, the tradition holds that he's beheaded. And he was actually treated better than Jesus and Peter because he's a Roman citizen. They were crucified, but he was given the dignity of a quick death through beheading. But we don't get any of that. Some accounts actually say that, when Acts ends, he is there to preach the gospel with boldness without hindrance. Acts ends. There's a strong argument that there's 4 more years of Paul's life. That actually, Paul has a first trial, which he refers to in 2 Timothy, and it goes okay. Even though no one else supports him, it seems like it goes okay because he was like, well then, it went all right, so here I am still writing letters to you all. And some even say that after his first release, for the next 2 years, he continues his missionary journey. He literally leaves Rome and keeps going. They said, I always wanted to go to Spain. They say he goes to Spain. It said that Paul went to the westernmost parts of the empire, it's kind of contemporary writings. So that's either Spain or even, technically speaking, all the way to England. I don't think he actually made it all the way to England. That's probably too far. But the argument can be made that Paul keeps going. He actually goes as far or further west than he had gone in terms of distance. So the story just stops? Did Luke just die in the middle of it? No. Luke actually is there. In Timothy, Paul says, and here I am in this dungeon pit. So that's how we know he's in a different prison. Right? It's a different context. He said, and only a few people came to help me, including Luke the doctor helped me. So Luke the author is still there. So we have basically 2 to 4 years of potentially unaccounted for events. And so you have to say, what does this ending mean? What do we do with this? This book ends before the story is clearly over. Even of Paul's life, the story is not over. All right, so I'm going to try and make sense of this for us. So I think it's not a particularly easy text to take something away from. It's a lot of interesting narrative, but it's hard to know, well, what do you do with that, right? Like, do you also therefore go seek to be appropriately irritating to the government that you get house arrest, but then you can what do you do with this, right? And I do think that there's one main thing is that I think Luke ends the book here because he wants you to feel like the story is not over. This book is called the Acts of the Apostles, right? And though the apostles themselves, the people who saw Jesus, they're dead, they've passed away. The acts of God through the Holy Spirit, which really the real character, the main character of Acts is actually the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit's still at work. And so, in a way, regardless of what happens to Paul, the story continues. The story continues for us. I don't know all of you, but I'm going to guess that most of us cannot trace our familial lineage to kind of Jews who converted in the first century. Just kind of suggest that, right? Most of us. If anything, we can trace our faith or family to sort of, well, my dad or my grandmother or whatever it is heard the gospel in this context and within a generation or two ago, right? Or maybe a little bit more. But the fact that there are so many of us in this room and we don't look like Paul, we're not first century Jews from Palestine or the larger diaspora, suggests that the Holy Spirit has been at work. For there to be Christians who look like us means that the Holy Spirit and the Acts of the Apostles have continued since this book has ended. It did not end with the Roman Empire. In fact, the spread of the church and the gospel has gone far beyond the end of the Roman Empire, even, the end of that story, and many others and every other empire after it. And so there's something amazing about sort of this abrupt ending. It's like this episode, you're expecting it to go on for another 25 more minutes, and it stops at minute 33. There's more. So what do we take away from this, though? What does it mean that the story is still continuing? Well, let me draw a few things here. The first that we can draw from this section of 4 chapters is that, power, earthly power, actually seems to be a bit of a pitfall. Right, so Paul's a prisoner, right, under this system, and he's being opposed by the Jewish leaders and by the Romans. But in every case, what you have to observe is that those who have power are unable to do the thing that is good or right or true, even when they want to, right? So Felix, the first governor, is so unnerved by hearing the gospel that he doesn't want to proceed the case because he's too nervous with the implications of the situation. But not only does he not have the dignity to kind of do the right thing, he keeps kicking the can down the road. And it says that he actually hoped that Paul would pay him a bribe to get this thing going. So he would actually only advance the case in any direction for dishonest reasons. He would not actually rule in this case because it was right or true or good by any set of laws. He would only do it because he was bribed or pressured, right? Bribed by Paul or pressured by the Jewish leaders, right? So this guy's in power. You have to ask, wait, what sort of power is that? Yes, he has the power to kind of do these things, but is he really in power? Because he seems like he's at the mercy of the supply-demand chain. He wants some kind of kickback. He won't seem to take any action that's of any merit, right? He's too guilty and nervous, so he's just, I don't want to touch it, right? And then the next thing happens is that Festus, the next governor, hears the case, and he cries out also in hysterics, Paul, you should just stop saying these things. Don't say that Jesus is the Messiah who came to bring salvation, to including the Gentiles. Don't say these offensive things. Like, you're Jewish. This is bad for your reputation. This is going to make you bad. You've ticked off a lot of the Jews. Stop talking. I don't want this on record. Your learning has made you insane, right? So he hears these claims, and his only thought is that this is a contentious statement. He won't contend with the actual content of what Paul is saying. He won't engage with the actual content, the spiritual content of what he's saying, right? And he's the one who's in power. But, again, I want to give Agrippa some credit, because Agrippa clearly has done his own research. And it says he was familiar with these things. And he said, do you believe in the law and the prophets? He said, Paul says, I know you believe in the prophets. I know you know these things. And Agrippa seems to agree. And even Agrippa, who's amenable, who's agreeable, who's open to the gospel, he still himself, at least to our knowledge, cannot or does not become a Christian. He does not submit or even rule justly. Now, again, I do think his hands are tied, but that's the thing. He's a king and his hands are tied. What's the good of being a king? He said, this man is innocent. Paul is innocent. He's guilty of nothing. But because he's invoked this other right to go see Caesar, we cannot release him. Right? So these three people, all who have power, who are in this seat of power over Paul, basically admit they do not have power to do a thing that they want to do or should do or it is necessary. What's the point of power? No one will release innocent Paul. The centurion Julius, Paul's like, hey, don't put us on that boat. Julius is like, shut your mouth. We're going to go. And they almost die 7 more times. Okay. So this is not hard. This is literally like, do we get on a boat or not get on a boat? It's not a complicated theological, it's not constitutional law here. It's like, hey, the weather could be bad now. I think that we should not get on this boat. That might be better. Insurance is like, you be quiet. We're going to go. What is the point? What is the point of having power if the things you can do can literally endanger people that no one else is just going to do these decisions, but he will still do them? What's the point of that? And when they're in the storm, it's actually Paul's the one who's like looking out for everyone. He's like, hey, you all should eat something. You look really, really sick. Like, if you don't eat something, you're going to pass out. Like, everyone should eat something, and maybe we'll live, okay? And hey, maybe don't murder all the prisoners. That would be really unethical. Like, maybe just trust us. I promise you, if we all swim, we'll make it, and then we'll all be there, okay? Right? He's the one who actually looks out for the good of the people. The captain doesn't. Centurion doesn't. In the end, all these people with power have no power, or they don't use it, or they misuse it. And I think that has to tell us something about what power really is. What is considered to be earthly power, I think has to be understood as being fickle or kind of double-edged, right? You think that if you have power, you'll have control over things, but clearly there's no control. Clearly those in power have no control. And I think this is important for us because there are many times where we as people, we as individuals, let alone as Christians, just in general, we want to have power over a situation. I think the standard method, the kind of for those of us who are Chinese or Asian American, the Asian American dream is you come to this country, you work hard, and ideally you have a degree beforehand, but if you don't, you get your kids to have a degree. And you eventually use some form of college system to kind of get the family more educated and what have you. And so then eventually there's houses and cars involved and property, and we've made it, right? There's some kind of idea. And the thing is that plan is a pretty workable plan. Many of us in here are products of that plan, are beneficiaries of that idea of my parents worked hard and they got a good job here and they kind of worked a lot and they didn't take enough vacation, but now they have a Lexus and now we both went to college and all these things. Okay, so that plan, that is better. That is a better plan than we're poor, didn't know we have a job, okay? But this plan takes a lot of control and a lot of work. And even if you do it to your best of ability, there's no guarantee it's going to work, right? My entire generation and some students who are younger than me all went to computer science because that's where all the money was, right? Oh, you go into computer science, you can go work for Facebook and, unintentionally destabilize democratic regimes in Southeast Asia, whatever, it doesn't really matter, you're just coding. And you make a lot of money, and then that's your Asian American dream. Okay, well, too bad, 1, Facebook's not popular anymore, so sucks to be you. 2, ChatGPT is smarter than you, so sucks to be you, right? 3, this generation of younger people are do we even want social media? So sucks to be you. So these are good plans, and now you're maybe these plans are not actually so good. Even they could be wrong, but even if they're not wrong, they're no longer effective. right? And so I think it's worth noting that even if you have great plans, even if you have good plans that are even ethical, there's no guarantee that the plans you make and the power you have will guarantee a good or right result. It doesn't mean you don't try. It doesn't mean you don't care. It doesn't mean you don't prepare. But I do think that many of us, our main inclination is that if things start to get crazy, we look for more power. We squeeze harder. Maybe actually that's maybe not what this text tells us, right? The more open-handed the people were, the better things went. King Agrippa is the most reasonable because he's the most open to the gospel. The centurion eventually does right by everyone because he listens to Paul. He says, okay, you know what? I was wrong. Putting us on that boat was really, really bad. So Paul, when you give me advice, I'm going to try and listen to you from now on. That goes better. See, the more open-handed these people with power are, the more open they are to change or disruption, the better things seem to go. I just want to draw that conclusion. I think for us that we can't see power as an end-all, be-all, as the final solution to everything. I say that in a lot of senses. Like I don't say this to be partisan or political, but there are many Christians who want power of various kinds, including political kinds, because they think that it will advance the gospel. And no doubt in some way it will. Like I work for a parachurch ministry. We're a missions organization. And it certainly helps when the U.S. Constitution is interpreted in a way that allows my organization to be on campus and talk to students. Because in some cases they say, hey, that's religious encroachment. You can't do that, right? It certainly helps. So I'm really grateful when the freedom of religion and free speech make room for reasonable discourse about the gospel. I can do my job because I'm not being told that what I'm doing is unconstitutional. So when you have politicians or kind of laws that affirm that, like that, I benefit from that, and in a very obvious way, the gospel benefits from that. But then I also have to say, like, there's also times where people squeeze and use power, and even if you protect the right of one, you can actually harm other people, right? Or you make deals with parties that don't actually think about the things that are actually good for everybody. And so there's a lot of ways that actually pursuing power, as if it's the best means, is actually it's a pitfall. It can be a real big pitfall. All right, I'm mindful of time. Let me keep moving. What I also want to point out is that Paul, through this process, is like, again, as a correlation to the prior thing, is also like pretty powerless. Very weird set of passages. He's brilliant. He defends himself. He gives great speeches. He persuades people to some degree, but he's also kind of powerless. So the first thing I want to point out is that he invokes his right as a citizen to go be seen by Caesar. And that's like a power move. It's sort of like, oh, you're in custody and said, you don't get to hold me in prison. I'm a citizen. Haha. But the thing is, because he does that, then he has to be proceeded to Rome as a prisoner to be seen by Caesar. He can't be released and proceed of his own free will. And so you can debate, like, was that a good move or not? But what might have been seen at first as like, oh, he did this power move to get out of prison in a certain way, it actually keeps him in prison in another way. What's the good of power? I don't know. It's tough there. What we do see, though, is that Paul gets to influence many people while he's a prisoner. That's pretty weird. That doesn't happen to most people. When you're a prisoner, you get one phone call, right? No, Paul gets to influence many people through preaching the gospel while he's a prisoner for multiple years. Oddly, because he's a prisoner, he makes sure it means that his fellow prisoners don't die in the shipwreck because the centurion's like, I can't kill this guy, so I'm not going to let anyone die, right? And he's in prison for so many years. Well, it's his imprisonment that allows him to write the letters that you and I have today in the Bible. It's totally possible that Paul's is kind of like an action-oriented guy. So if Paul had not been in prison, like I think we have to be honest, I'm not sure Paul would have sit down to write. He'd have been like, well, I got to go to Spain. I'm busy. And like he would have kind of kept going, which again, I trust God, so that might have been a good thing, but I think it's pretty great that we have 4 books of the Bible because of him. Now, I will say that cost him a lot. It was a lot of suffering. You can read it in his words. He said, it's a terrible time. Remember my chains. I need a doctor to help me. I'm cold. Bring me my favorite cloak and my books, right? There's a lot of suffering involved, but God uses this imprisonment to bless everybody from now until eternity, I guess, because of the written word. That's pretty amazing. He has to wait perpetually. He's arrested again. He's put in the worst prison. Again, it's just this up and down. And so again, if you look at Paul's life on the basis of his circumstances, I think it's hard to tell, like, well, is it going well? I don't think it's easy to tell that. Just like when I was here last time, there's the argument about should he have gone to Jerusalem in the first place. It's not easy to tell. The text gives you plenty of evidence that it was a very difficult decision even in that day. So it wasn't so much like, well, did Paul do the right thing and therefore things worked out? I don't even know what you can say is the right thing or what could be worked out. All I know is that Paul knew that he had to go to Rome, and whether he got there the right way or not, somehow he got there, and clearly God was at work the whole time, and clearly God used these advantages and disadvantages in some way. And like, I'm not saying your will doesn't matter, I'm not saying your choices don't matter, but what I am saying is that what Paul does is that whether he chooses well or not at first, he responds to the opportunities in front of him with a different mindset about the gospel. He doesn't try and seize more power, right? I would think that given like the Titanic action movie sequence of chapter 27, like when they get to Malta, I would have expected jailbreak. Now that's where they get rescued and they get set free. But just like when Jesus is in the garden about to be arrested, when Peter pulls up the sword and says, we're gonna get out of here, Jesus says, no, that's not what we're doing. Paul also doesn't get a jailbreak. Right? That's what I would say would have been a better outcome, a better ending. That's not what happens. So I think that what we have to see is that trying to control every circumstance through using our power is a bit of a hit or a miss. But what you can do is lean into whatever situations those are that you're in and look for where God's power is at work, which I think Paul does really well. He uses imprisonment to bless the church for every generation after by writing 4 letters. He uses imprisonment to preach the gospel to people, including in Caesar's own domestic household. It says that he's preached the gospel so long in his house arrest in Rome that household servants of Emperor Nero are Christian. Crazy stuff. So what do we do with this, though? We're at the ending. Like I said, I don't think the last verse there, it says, he proclaimed the kingdom of God, taught about Jesus Christ with all boldness and without hindrance. Like, that's not the end, right? Verse 31 is not the end of the Acts of the Apostles. It's the end of this section. Again, we think that Paul had 2 to 4 more years of ministry afterwards, right? But I think it ends this way because it says, okay, well, now the book is open-ended for us. I think that we have to trust that God's providence is the most important factor in our lives, more than power and more than plans. Power matters. Right, we do see Paul using his rights as a citizen in an effective way. Right, some people kind of think that political power is irrelevant, and I think that's not true. Paul used it very effectively, sometimes in ways that he didn't necessarily mean to, but it's important. But it's not the most important thing. And plans are important, preparations and hopes and desires are important, but they're not the most important thing. In the end, it's God's providence to work in and through all these things. And so, for many of us who are control-oriented, I think we have to be more open-handed. I can't say more than that. I think the text is so chaotic, right? And then I think proactive and reactive participation, right? I think we should make plans to be part of God's work. So I think that for those of you here today, honestly, I just want to affirm you. Like, I don't know what brought you in today. Like, maybe you're trying to fulfill a value made to God. Maybe this is a regular kind of routine with God. Maybe you're here because someone you're interested in kind of dragged you. Maybe you feel guilty about something, you're trying to sort stuff out. I don't know. But like, the fact that you're here this morning, I think it's a good sign. That's a proactive decision. You're here. Okay? Because a lot of people aren't. A lot of people aren't making time in their week to hear God's word or to worship him or to kind of wrestle with things in a deeper nature. And so when it comes to worshiping God and also working for him, serving, I know there's like the food collection thing right now, right? There's other things kind of that even this community is doing, right? These are acts of service that you can choose to be part of, right? This is a little bit different, but in the old system, people were told to give a tithe. You give your first portion of income or something to God, right? That's a proactive choice. You're supposed to tally that before you do the rest, right? Because it's a proactive choice. But I also think that we have to be good at reactive participation, that if plans change or things go wrong, are we just kind of thrown for a loop and said, oh, my life's over, nothing works? I say this because I'm like that as a person. I'm like that. I'm not someone who says, oh, no, my plan didn't work. I get upset. I stay mad about stuff for a long time. Paul apparently does. He's like, well, I guess I'm in prison. I'll make the best of it. I mean, I don't know. I could not do that. I think it's amazing. I think that's being shaped by God's provision and providence and saying, hey, God will use this. Let me figure out what I can do. And so like having that growth mindset, openness about, hey, maybe God can use this and this isn't the end of the story, is a mindset I think that many of us need to have. That's reactive participation. Saying, okay, God gave me an opportunity with someone or something. Let me try and see how I can be part of that. So I'm going to tell just a few brief stories. I know I'm kind of over time, but just to give you an idea that we all have a part in the story, and it looks like different things at different times and different sizes. There's no one way to be part of the story. See, to be part of the story, I'm not saying, therefore go be like Paul, go sell everything, forget marriage, go travel and kind of go across the sea, risk your life, get in prison. Like, if you're called to do that, that's great. Like, I hope that if that's needed to happen, I will do that as needed. And I'll tell you a little bit about that too. Okay, but I'm not saying you have to go become a missionary in a hostile country to do this. I'm saying that being part of God's story looks like anything on any day with any person. So this is a picture of me when I was in college in my group of friends in sophomore year of InterVarsity at Duke. And this is a pretty big group of people, okay? Now here's the funny thing. The year before when I was a freshman, our group was like, this is my class, okay, my year, 2010 graduates. The year before, this group was like a third this size. Now how did it get so big? Not because of me is the answer. The answer is because I've got a couple friends there who, unlike me, were nicer and open-handed and hospitable towards their non-Christian peers in their classes, their standmates in the orchestra, their lab mates, and they were nice to them and invited them to stuff and encouraged them. And so they started to come, and because the gospel is good news, their friends who had not been in church for a long time or had never been in the church or had rejected the church said, hey, you guys are more decent people than my pagan friends who drink all the time. I'm not trying to be mean. Literally, this is the conclusion they came to. They said, I am stressed out and depressed with my other people. You all are actually nice to us. I might want to hang out with you all more. And so, more and more people came to our fellowship. And what's funny is, I'm the one who ended up in professional ministry, and I've got gifts in evangelism, and I've had the privilege. In this group, I've had the privilege of sort of helping 5 to 7 of these people make recommitments to Jesus, and 3 to 5 of them make first-time commitments to Jesus. So I was very active. But the truth is, I had no one to be ministry active with if not for my friends inviting people. I have this important role. I'm the missionary. I'm the guy who comes up and preaches, and I'm the pastor. But the most important thing, the hardest part from my perspective, was getting people in the room and wanting to be there. And I didn't do that, and I couldn't do it. My friends who were quieter, shyer, less outgoing, less outspoken, they found their own way to invite people to the aroma of Christ and the good news of the gospel. We all had a part to play. We all had a part to play. I might have been this one essential, obvious point of action, but the truth is, we owe all of that humanly to the friends who did the day-to-day work of being nice to their stand partner and helpful to their lab mates. I didn't do any of that stuff because when I wasn't in lab, I didn't take any of those classes, okay? So I couldn't have been there. But, some of these friends, the guy in the white shirt over there with the glasses, he's Singaporean. So when he got to college, he'd done his military service. He's I'm trying to get out of here, okay? I'm older than all of you. But he was he's super smart. And he was really helpful to all of his friends, including the non-Christians. He said, wow, you are so helpful. You're better than all my other people. You actually will sit down and help me. He said, yeah, I care about you. I don't know. And that blew their minds because they'd never been in a system where people actually cared about one another. So we all have a part to play. Now this is a picture of my parents on a recent trip they took to Germany. And they're not just eating with a bunch of Chinese people, which is what Chinese people do everywhere, right? They're there on a mission trip to support a Chinese church kind of like ours, Chinese ministry like ours, in another country, in Germany. And so this church has been here for over 30 years, and it's 2 generations deep in immigration. But in Germany, the immigrational stage is 1 generation behind that. And so you still have people coming to this country, coming to Germany, who have not heard the gospel, are looking for opportunity, and are trying to figure out their lives. They don't have they would have BMWs there, but they don't have BMWs there yet. They don't have nice houses yet, right? They're trying to figure things out. And so the church there has an opportunity to minister to these people. And so my parents who are, my dad doesn't like to tell people his age. He always says, well, how old are you? I'm only 65. Which he's been 65 for 25 years, so it doesn't make any sense. Okay, so I'm not going to tell you how old my dad is, but the point is, my parents are in their retirement age. My mom and dad are in retirement age. And so going to Florida and golfing would be nice, I guess. But they think it's more fun to go to Germany and they do some fun. They see fun sites for them. We went to Martin Luther's, first church. All these cool things, right? Some of you have no idea what these things are. That's fine. But they also hosted dinners and gave talks and met with people who want to hear about the gospel. Now, and you don't have to be my parents doing what they do, but can't you see you can use your vacation or your retirement time differently than the world would tell you to do that. I think that's interesting. That's a part to play. Some folks have, part of it is, my dad used to go to another country with lots of Chinese people. I'll just say it that way, that it's not simple to go there anymore because of political reasons. And that was really sad for him. But he's now found a new way to do things with Chinese people in other countries. And so I think God gives us opportunities. I don't know. And he's taking advantage of them. And so my mom and dad go on these trips And they're going to go back next summer to Germany and to France to do like Christian camps. I'm like, what? Your travel life is more interesting than mine. You know? Let me tell you about one more story. In the face of power, reaction, and I don't know. Okay, so again, I'm not saying these things to be political. I'm not trying to be partisan. But you know, this year has not been an easy year for those who are not American citizens, particularly if you are of a Latinx background or you are of a brown or Muslim-looking background. And this began early in the year. In March, a Tufts postdoc student who teaches like literature or something was detained by unmarked, hooded, armed men outside of her apartment in Somerville, like a mile from where I live, just walking home to go to like dinner. Right, so like you have to imagine like you're getting out of your car, you're walking from the mailbox to your door, and like 5 big guys, hands on hips, balaclavas on face, sunglasses, hats. They come up to you and they just seize you, and she's a woman. Okay, so like it's just like you have to. This is a terrifying moment. Okay, she was detained, and actually for like days. No one can find out where she was because she was getting moved between prisons, detention centers. At one point she was in New Hampshire, and they moved her down to kind of Louisiana. I mean, it was crazy stuff. Okay, so like just for context, right? Like many of us in our families, like my parents came here for grad school. Imagine if your parents were coming home from lab and they were thrown in a white van by a bunch of big white guys with guns, and you don't know where they were. They were 6 states away. 3 days later, and they don't get a phone call. Right? So when this happened, a lot of people in doing campus work or kind of who were students or grad students in the area, there's a lot of students in Cambridge and Somerville where I live, right? And they said, this is outrageous. Like, also she was ostensibly detained because she'd like written some newspaper articles like for a certain political position, right? So she doesn't own a gun. She's not like stockpiling bomb-making materials. These are words on paper, right? Which she's here to do because she's a grad student, right? And so it's really outrageous. And so there was this, it wasn't exactly a protest. It was a rally to kind of talk about, hey, this is not something we should accept in our community. It's not actually good for, a lot of Boston is built on graduate students and so forth. And so in this moment where kind of like power was being used to kind of take advantage of people or harm them, a lot of folks were kind of getting really nervous. So I actually went to that rally. Not because I agree with everything that was said there, but I was like, well, I care for students, and this is a student who looks like someone who I could be ministering to, and actually is within my purview of ministry. Well, I don't happen to know her, but some of my students actually did know her and knew her professors. Like we're 1 degree, 2 degrees removed, and if we're not there, if we as Christians are not there, like, well, how do we know what's going on? How are we part of the conversation? So I went to this thing, and it was a hard time. It's been a hard time for those who are not American citizens. And for us in ministry, we've been saying, well, what are we going to do? Because like already Chinese international students enrollment has dropped by 30 to 40% because of political situation. And that changes things for even how our church does ministry, right? This opportunity for the gospel has changed. We developed over the years all these practices about how to minister to international students. And my white colleagues too, who are not Chinese, they care about international ministry. They've been ministering to Chinese internationals for decades, and now suddenly it's changed. They said, is this just going to like collapse our ministry? Like there's no one to minister to. We thought it was going to get bad. Honestly, in May, we said, we don't know what's going to happen. Now, what I'll say is this. I don't love what has happened about a lot of things. I would not say that things have gotten better for non-American students that my staff and I minister to. I wouldn't say that. What I would say is that God will not be thwarted in ways I don't really understand. So this picture is from our fall retreat in October. We have one for Boston grad students within our varsity every year. And it's usually about 150 something, 130 students to 200 students. Well, this year, you can't totally tell, but if you look closely, for the first time ever, the majority of our retreat attendees were not white Americans. And the majority of our retreat attendees were internationals. And from what we can estimate, the majority of our attendees were not Christian. So I have a retreat that usually is 130, 200 people. And we're used to looking a certain way and how it can do certain things and what we can do at it. And this year, by God's sort of hilarious math, we have the same number of people, but who those people are is very different. Very different. One of the things I've noticed, so this is just one staff of mine, so the white guy in the corner, he actually speaks, well, he doesn't speak good Chinese, but he did ministry in China for a while, so he's spent a long time doing ministry to Chinese international students at BU. And it's been a real difficult thing for him and his wife that all the Chinese students have decreased. He said all these gifts and things that he's learned to do for so long, he doesn't know what to do with anymore. But what has happened, instead of, so what used to be a fellowship of lots of Chinese nationals visiting and asking questions about the gospel, he now has lots of not totally informed but happy to be there Indian students and Muslim students from various other countries. And he's like, I don't know what to do with them, but they're here, so I guess I should figure that out. Their weekly dinner had been declining over years, and at one point it had been 40, it had been down to 10, 15. This year it's been 40 people again every week. It's just different people. My other staff are meeting international students from different countries. I'm not saying I like it more or less, that's not what I'm saying. But what I am saying is we are recognizing there's an opportunity. So the table up there, in a couple of these pictures, there are a lot of students from Kazakhstan. People from Muslim origin country with very little exposure to the gospel. And they like our retreat. I mean, I guess it's pretty cool, but I can't really tell you why. You can go to the woods other ways. Last year, a bunch of them came, and only 1 or 2 of them came again this year, but they invited 10 more friends. So apparently there's a lot of Kazakh students at BU. Who knew? But they like coming to our stuff. And you see the woman up there in the head covering. She's actually a pretty serious Muslim. She wears that because she's pretty serious. Most of the Kazakh people don't wear head coverings anymore, okay? But she's come to our retreat, and she's been in our worship services. It's pretty strange to me. She comes to our Bible studies. She was at this, we were doing a panel on sort of relationship advice from a Christian perspective. And so here we are having this panel. I'm giving advice about sort of what does it mean to marry believers and non-believers. Lots of very Christian answers about kind of faith. And afterwards she came to me and said, thank you so much for your answer. That was a really helpful thought, because as I think about the purpose of faith in my life, that I need to think about what kind of partner I'm going to marry. And I'm like, what? You're a Muslim, and I'm a Christian minister. What are you saying? But somehow my faithful ministry of the gospel made sense to her. And somehow, the hospitality of my colleague who normally works with Chinese students, that makes sense to them. Makes sense to her and her friends. And so she said, this is one of the favorite things that I do every week is come to this thing. Her name is, I won't say your names, I don't want to give her it anyway, but she's named after this Kazakh queen, pretty cool character, who basically killed a bunch of Romans in the era of kind of Genghis Khan. It's just, they have a whole history that I'm not even aware of, right? And she's a Muslim. There's people who are coming to encounter and interact with the gospel that we never met before. So is that a plan going wrong? I mean, yeah, in a way. And is political power being misused in a way that hurts students? Yes, in a way. But God is also using it in a way to bring people to encounter him in ways that we couldn't before. And so, I might have a preference or a desire about what it could look like. But most importantly, God has a provision. So let me pray for us that we would have this sort of openness in our own lives. Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, we thank you that power and plans do not disrupt your provision. That even when things go wrong in our eyes, that you are able, you are good, and you bring things to fruition. Would you help us be open to when disruption happens? Would you help us to be able to react well when things go wrong? And to see that actually you are right and good and can do something. Would you help us see our part in your plan? That whether we are the one inviting or preaching or cooking or talking or driving, whatever it may be, God, would you help us see that we have a part to play? And that Acts ends not because it is over, but because we are part of the next chapter. We thank you for this time. We thank you for your goodness. We thank you for bringing us to the end of this year. Would you help us see the new year with these kind of open eyes? In your name we pray. Amen.